Good evening, everyone. This is JP Bedell, the Lighting Guy, and welcome to episode 6 of the Lighting Guy podcast, part of the AV Nation family of podcasts. Before we get started, first I want to note the somewhat new location. We are still very much in my house, but the home office is getting a little work done. So welcome to my little kitchenette area here where the coffee is ready to go. Otherwise, a couple of little bits of business that I wanted to get to before we get into the heart of the show. One of the things we're going to be talking about today is the New York Festival of Light, which is coming up November 6th through the 8th. If you're in the New York area and you want to see some amazing installations, what's on tap is it's going to be pretty awesome. I'm planning on being there at least a couple of the nights. And so make sure you check that out. In addition, if you are interested in talking about this conversation, about lighting conversations in general, get out on Twitter. The hashtag is AVNation. You can find me at James Bedell. We'll put up all these links in the show notes afterwards, but make sure that you're sharing the conversation. All right, I think that's all the bits of business for now. I want to get into my conversation with John Ensor Parker. If you go to his website, which is natureofenergy.com, you're going to find a wide array of work, everything from large-scale projection work to lighting design to installation work and public art. Really interesting credits. This is the part where I embarrassed John a little bit. He picked up his Bachelor of Science in Mechanical Engineering from Florida State University in 1993. He's gone on to be a visiting artist at Florida State, at Montclair State, at University of Texas, at the Tisch School of the Arts at NYU. He's been a guest lecturer at NYU. He's done TEDx at NYU Poly. There's a lot of stuff I could talk about, but I think it's best to talk about the work itself. So, John, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
All right, so let's, better than I could summarize it, why don't you talk a little bit about how you started in lighting design, projection design, what got you into it, what inspires you about it?
I've been working as you described. I was studied engineering and studied a lot of physics and math, and so I was making a lot of. At the same time, I was always making paintings and drawings, and so I had a career as a painter for quite some time. But I was always interested in video, and when I got my first little projector, started playing with it, I just became more fascinated in light, even more than the content of the video. So I have a studio in Dumbo, Brooklyn, and some friends of mine started bigger and bigger projectors and just guerrilla style projecting outside on the Manhattan Bridge, Anchorage, and that kind of really just brought on a whole new interest when one of my friends, Farkas Falup, a friend of mine from Hungary, started video mapping. And it was very simple back then. This was years ago, and he started basically just, there's bricks, the side of the bridge is made of bricks, and he started like following the patterns of the bricks. And then he started opening those bricks up virtually, and so that kind of just opened my interest into projection mapping.
So just to give everybody a picture, if you've never been down in this neighborhood in Brooklyn, essentially under the Manhattan Bridge, it's called, Manhattan Bridge is part of Dumbo. That's under Manhattan Bridge, district under Manhattan Bridge. It's an industrial area that's converted much more into artists' lofts and large office workspace, but underneath there's cobblestone streets and the large structures that hold up the Manhattan Bridge. It's a really, really cool architectural space, lots of projection surfaces, lots of architecture to work in. There's several offices down there that I go and do some work with, and it's a really inspiring area. So you got into projection mapping, and now when you're doing, I guess what I'm trying to get at is, do you see your work more as in the lighting design side or on the projection mapping side, or both?
Well, that's an interesting question because they both are projecting light. And they're both indirect light, because any lighting pieces I do are typically indirect lighting, meaning that light is refracting off of another surface. So that being said, I've done, last year I had a show in Spain, and it was strictly a lighting installation. And and I do approach that very differently than I do, say, a projection map piece, because of the fact that we're able to influence content. You're able to create objects and change them at your imagination is the limit. But there's the influence of light on the human psyche, physiologically and psychologically, is pretty powerful. And with projection mapping, you have so many tools at hand, as where when you're dealing with lighting design, the difference between 2,000 Kelvin white light and 4,000 Kelvin white light is an extreme difference. And I really appreciate going to that level of finite difference, small changes, and how it can affect the entire environment. As where whenever I approach projection mapping, you have an opportunity to introduce a narrative. You can tell a story, which you don't quite have the same opportunity with static light. So they are the same; they're both light, but there are different opportunities with the different media.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny you should say that. I mean, my background is in lighting design, and I never really touch projection work. I don't really, it's not part of my world. I grew up in the theatrical lighting world, and now I work mostly in architectural lighting. And what you're saying about Kelvin temperature in particular, but really any of these sort of, we throw out, especially in the architectural world, so often, well, this fixture generates 1,700 lumens, and it's this Kelvin temperature, and it's got this CRI, and it's 2 McAdams ellipses between fixtures, and all the things that we throw out there. But it doesn't really capture the experience of any given light source in a space under the under the conditions that they're meant to be viewed. And I always try to drive that home to people, that you need to see it to really understand it. How do you feel about the sense of, or the experiential sense of, a lighting installation versus, say, a painting or a still art or something where it's an object to be viewed?
Well, excuse me, I don't really tend to isolate, I don't tend to isolate, art and science from one another. I consider them to be the same. And that carries across the board for everything. And if I'm doing a lighting design, because I also do architectural installation lighting design as well. And for example, if there were a space where there were going to be a large painting on a wall, I definitely feel that there is, when those light leaves this fixture that you just specified, which you can appreciate even in a showroom, because there's 1,000 other fixtures in the showroom, but when that fixture generates photons, light hits this painting and refracts off, and then the person who's in the room experiences that light. The frequencies have changed, the temperatures have changed, so the surface that the light is engaged in the process in its journey before it reaches you is all part of that. It's all part of the final experience. So I don't look at things separately. I look at it all as one environmental experience.
So when you're creating a piece, I imagine that works through all parts of the senses, right? So you're thinking about what people are hearing, what they're seeing, how they're engaged spatially with the work. I mean, it's got to be a totally immersive environment, or maybe not. Maybe that's not the point.
Well, it depends on the project. When referencing this projection mapping the Manhattan Bridge, we do have audio.
Right.
And so that's a whole other aspect that, as you know, it's a whole other sense. Right. As where with pure lighting, that's not always a component. And mapping, one interesting thing about mapping, I live next to this bridge, and I've been here for a lot of years. And like I said, we've been projecting out of my studio window for years with single channel projectors, getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And the first time we had the opportunity to projection map the entire bridge inside the archway, which is a completely immersive situation, and the entire exterior facade, it was about 30,000 square feet of surface area. It was 20 projectors, and these were Well, the first time we actually projected on the exterior of the bridge with three big 32,000 lumen Christie projectors with wide-angle lenses. The second time we did it, we used six 20K Christies with not quite as wide of a spread. I don't know how technical you want to get into
No, hey,
design of that, but
no, go for it.
the point of that was the first year with these large projectors, we basically overlaid them. We used the widest angle lens, I think it was like a 0.67, and so what that did is it spread out the light from a single projector over the entire surface of the exterior facade of the bridge.
Sure.
Then we went over that same area with the second one and with the third one. And the nice thing about that is if you lose a projector during the gig, you're going to lose some luminosity, but you're not going to have a hole in your image.
Right.
So when we designed it the second year, we decided to go to tile them. So each projector took a zone. So there were 6 projectors tiled, and then they were just aligned and blended together.
Okay.
The good thing about that is it was brighter and we had smaller pixels. Our pixels went about from 1 inch and 3/16 to about a 1/2 inch because we weren't spreading that signal out so far. The disadvantage is if we lost a projector, we would have a hole in our in the piece. But it looked a lot better. So anyway, going back to the original question is what projecting on this bridge has done is it changed this huge object that's a part of many people's lives. And the first time I saw it, it looked like I had never seen it before. It took on a new life, and through we create a lot of our imagery is created in a 3-dimensional world with a 3D model. So we're able to open up the surface and able to look inside, and it shocked me how differently it looked. Like a completely new thing. And then the second time, that newness didn't wear off because it was completely different content, different forms, different colors, etc. So anxious to see what it's like this year.
Right.
What we've done this year is we actually invited. I have a couple collaborators, and we work independently. But when we get together, we're called 3Search, and this is so it's a company, a brand, and that consists of Leo Kelps, who's a curator, and a group called Glowing Bulbs, who's they're friends of mine. They're a digital artist collective from Budapest, Hungary.
Okay.
And so together we're putting on this show for the New York Festival of Light. And so Leo and I curated the show, and what we said is we're going to curate it like an art show. And we invited, there's going to be 7 mapping pieces. And there's going to be mapping pieces from Glowing Bulbs. We'll make one. I'll make one. Friends of ours from Budapest, London, Berlin, New York. So it's an international exhibition, and each piece will have audio.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's really awesome.
I mean,
The show is incredible.
You don't get to do large-scale projection mapping too often, because the expense associated with the gear is incredibly excessive. It's in the hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Right.
So an opportunity like this with New York Festival of Light, who is giving us 6 big 20,000 lumen Barcos, and World Stage, who's always a big supporter in the arts, they're providing us with some D3 media servers for the playback.
Awesome.
So we got some really great toys to.
So let me just getting on that for a second. How do you feel about that? About projection mapping specifically? Because the medium is so expensive, do you feel like it's a prohibitive thing, or do you think it just means that it takes a lot more thought to planning and to really reach execution? It's not like picking up a canvas and a brush.
No, it's not like that at all. I'm very fortunate in that I have colleagues and friends who are really, really smart guys. Because when you get to this certain level, I mean, you can projection map with a little home projector. I've done a box in my studio, one of the earliest things. But to go big, it gets very complex and very technically demanding, both on the software side, building your workflow, a good friend of ours, Nils Porman, who's with Dandelion and Burdock in London, who's a guru at building workflow. That's a big part of doing this work. How are you going to take your renderings or your ideas and put them onto a template and take that through to being projected?
Right.
That's something that's an art form in itself. And my friend Farkas Falup, who's another just really smart guy that I'm lucky to work with. So it takes a handful of people to pull off something like this.
Sure. Sure. I mean, on the architectural side, what we find when you talk about teams, it tends to be, there's the architect that's designing the space, there's the lighting consultant or lighting designer, and then there's an engineer, generally speaking, for the electrical part. Then there's the AV integrator, the person that's going to control all of it if it's any more complicated than, a switch on the wall. And all of that, it's not to the degree of a projection mapping project, but I think it goes back to what you were saying about an experience, right? So what you experience when you go to the wall and you activate the lighting, or when you walk into the space for the first time, is a collaboration among all of those different professionals. It may not be as elegant, right? But if you're walking into a museum that's been climate controlled and the lighting has been specially designed and looked, and there's not only dimming involved, but there's also an architectural space that's been created. That's an experience that a team put together so that a visitor to that museum or whatever space we're talking about feels something. What I would my dream in life is to see that level of design brought into everyday spaces that we encounter all the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
So why that isn't brought into spaces like hospitals and ambulatory care facilities, or even retail, or spaces that we end up engaging with, transit spaces, subway stations, the places that people have to be all the time. That kind of design could be part of our daily life everywhere. And what I love about something like the New York Festival of Light is it opens up people's minds, because it's such a large installation, you can't help but notice it. I think it opens up people's lives or minds to this level of design being part of everyday life, and that's super exciting to me.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. And this is a large team here. This is a different thing than a building design like you're talking about. A lot of reasons that doesn't happen oftentimes is what everything seems to come down to is budget. Particularly when you're dealing with controls, are pretty costly. Everything costs money to do, but hopefully those costs are coming down, and knowledge is, kids that are studying design now are learning a lot more about the systems you're talking about. And I'm hoping that there's a mindset that changes. And it is, but it's going to take a little time. It's going to take effort and educating people.
Yeah, one of the things that I'm really excited about is a product like, on a very rudimentary level, a product like a Philips Hue, which gives the average user, the average homeowner or whoever, the power to change the light bulb color from their smartphone. When you start to remove, I think, all the layers to entry on or the barriers to entry on how you can change your environment, I think it gets people thinking in this way, right? That if it's possible on this scale, it should be possible on other scales. And that to me, I think, is really an exciting development, sort of a gateway drug.
Yeah. I mean, I would love to see something that, I don't necessarily know that people need to make their room, blue or pink, but if people could even change between the frequencies of white and change the mood. If your kids are studying, or you're studying something, you have a certain condition that's conducive to that type of intellectual process. If you're hanging out having a glass of wine, chatting, that's a different type of vibe as well. So yeah, that would be a nice device to have.
Yeah, and I think we're getting there. I mean, there are several manufacturers that are doing things in the tunable white space where, it dims and it warms as it dims, like it does with an incandescent source. It's not exactly the same experience, but I think it's getting there. And I think installation work like this just sort of, I love seeing the through line from what people, the light that people never think about, the light bulb they screw into their ceiling fixture at home. all the way to this heavily thought out projection mapped installation. That there's a through line there, and I love people moving on that continuum.
Yeah, projectors are light producers. They're big lights. They're obviously pretty expensive because of the way they deal with it. But we at 3Search did a project, an installation in the Guggenheim this year, and I was charged with making two pieces. And what I elected to do with one of the pieces was it had no imagery at all. It was called Color Theory, and it was basically an introduction of a series of colors based on a chart that I had made, which was based off of some little psychological story, which kind of contradicts what I said earlier, because I told a story using color, but no one knew that. I did. The idea was that they'd go through this range of emotions based on the room being filled with that color.
Yeah, I did a similar, well, not similar, but I did a dance piece a couple of years ago where the two dancers were in a black void and they were in white, and they danced the exact same choreography side by side, but we split the space by color space.
Mm-hmm.
And so the thought process I was hoping the audience would go through was experiencing the exact same piece in a different color field. How did you feel differently about it as you moved your eye from one side to the other?
Yeah, absolutely.
It was somewhat successful. I think if I had it to do over again, I might have slowed the piece down a little bit and given it a little more time to marinate. But I thought it was. I mean, color to me is I mean, I can't think about it without thinking about the Terrell exhibit and that installation. That how people experience color in space is something that we don't play with enough, if you ask me, in terms of architectural installation. But people are scared of it, and there's expense associated with it, like you were saying.
Yeah, but it's interesting you talk about you wish you would have gone a little slower, because it takes discipline to be a James Turrell.
Yeah.
It takes a ton of discipline, and you put yourself out there in your own mind as you're designing. Now he's a brand name,
right?
So he's fine. But if you or I had to do a piece equivalent to what he does, if he hadn't done it, then it would be really risky, because people are, and particularly with projection mapping, because typically it's public art, and people are expecting, this wow factor, and that's the case with lighting design as well. I find it interesting. I can see the Empire State Building from my house, and I'm always interested in what they're going to do, and a lot of times it's crazy, quick-moving things that has a certain feel, and then some nights it's just sitting on a nice, beautiful white, and they're all wonderful and relevant, but they're so different, But it definitely takes a lot of discipline to not just come out swinging whenever you're designing light.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
And it takes a lot of discipline this is something I work with the Broadway Green Alliance, and one of the conversations we keep having is as LED moves into more and more theatrical rigs, you've got theater spaces that were built with 600 amps, three-phase service, huge amounts of power to power these these theatrical rigs that they used to have. Well, when you move to LED, all of a sudden you have all this headroom in terms of how much available power there is. It takes a lot of discipline not to fill that headroom back up just because you can, right? Like, well, now that you can fill all this space with more toys, I'm always trying to advocate for telling the story with as few tools as possible, because economy of your palette is really important. And I think whatever your piece, whatever kind of work you're doing, that's my own, it's just my 2 cents on it.
Yeah, and if someone is an artist who works with light or a lighting designer, I think that it's important to define your aesthetic and define what experience you want to create. And if you do that, and you're consistent with it, and you get really good at it, because if you just throw a bunch of lights out there, you're not going to be any good at it, because it takes a lot of time. You learn every project how it could have been better, what you should have or shouldn't have done. And if you maintain and stick with that, you end up getting really good at it, and you get known as doing that, and people start coming to you because they want that. and
Mm-hmm.
whether they want crazy flashing lights, which some people like, or they want something more aesthetically subdued. I think there's, as a designer, lighting or art, you should almost not do the same thing, but focus on a certain style, so you can really get to know it.
Yeah, I agree with that too, and I think that there's at least on a I can understand wanting to explore different methods and different styles over the course of your career and not do the same thing over and over again. But I do think it's important that you this is my rule of thumb on this is I call it the Star Wars rule, right? So or the George Lucas effect. So he makes these three Star Wars movies on limited budgets with limited time frames, and they're classics because things get cut out of them, and he's got to edit down because that's what studios demand. And then 20 years later, he's got a gajillion dollars, and he can do pretty much whatever he fancies. And so there's all
Mm.
this extra stuff that is superfluous, and people don't enjoy the films as much. And that's my shorthand for this sort of effect, this idea that just because I can doesn't mean I should. And
Yeah.
how you approach the piece is really it's more about editing than it is about adding most of the
Hmm.
time, at least to me.
Yeah.
I don't know, sometimes it's about as much stuff as you can throw at it, but I hope not,
Yeah.
um,
Well,
let's
it's a little, sorry to, but one comment on that is it's different being an artist
mhm.
who's a pure artist and being someone who's in the lighting design business. And I know because I'm an artist, but I also do lighting design sometimes because I just love light and environments. But you're dealing with other people, like I said, engineers, architects, building owners, clients. It's a little different situation than if you're an artist, which is the case on the project we're about to do. No one's telling us what we can or can't do. No one has any expectations.
Right.
And we have the opportunity of doing, we can do live action footage. We've done green screen shots with people. We've done, I'm in my studio right now doing time-lapse sketches.
Hmm.
So there's a lot more in projection mapping that you could ever do if you're doing a lighting project on the bridge. So that being said, you have more opportunity with projection to do so much more. And so that what I was specifically talking about was more signed to washing light on a surface.
Sure.
And that's where it becomes so specific and so refined. And,
Yeah, I mean, it is two different things because the question becomes: are you casting light on the object to enhance the viewing of the object, or the space, or whatever you're lighting, or are you using it as a canvas to sort of open up and explore, like you were saying earlier? And I
right.
think there's
Yeah,
two very different experiences. Um,
absolutely.
but I mean, one of the things I love about, and I'm sort of went through and some of these experiences that you've created, I'm looking at, for instance, the Let Us Eat Cake installation. That to me is just it's a projection mapping piece, but it's also a beautiful piece of light. It's just a beautiful thing to see in
Mm.
that vantage point where the way it's photographed. It really is a lighted object more than it is like I mean, now granted I'm seeing stills of it right now, but it's a lighted object on the scene, which is just uh, something you don't see all the time. That becomes a three-dimensional piece.
Well, it's interesting because that piece I actually collaborated with a good friend of mine, Jason Krugman, who's a lighting designer.
I
He
know
went to IT.
yeah,
Excuse me?
Jason and I worked together a couple times.
Oh, Jason. Yeah, he's
Yeah.
a great guy, and he's a guru with lighting controls and LEDs.
Yep.
And so Jason and I have collaborated on designing some light fixtures in the past, as well as doing art projects. We've done interactive gallery pieces as well. But so we basically that piece on the new museum was live action. There was no animating. There was
Hmm.
no computers involved. It was a plexiglass scaled version of the building, and then taking LEDs that were just soldered together in a mesh and folding them together and moving them within the model.
That's
And
cool.
then and then it was mapped onto the building.
That's awesome. Yeah,
Yeah.
Jason, I did I did a pop-up installation a few years ago, and Jason did these really awesome LED cubes for us. These floating.
I know the project.
Yeah. Okay. There you go. See?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. No. We were. He did a bunch for that project too. It was 2 stories. It was like a 60,000 square foot project. We needed a bunch of cubes on that. It was cool.
Hmm. Yeah.
All right. Well, we talked a lot about Festival of Light, which I'm super excited about. We talked a little bit about scale. I mean, there are pieces of projection mapping scale. There are also small pieces that are going to be on display. There's interactive pieces. People are going to be in, color changing suits and stuff. It's going to be a happening down in Dumbo over November 6th, 7th, and 8th. So I'm excited. Let's see. I'm out of questions, and we've been on for about a half hour, so we're getting close to wrap time. Was there anything else that you wanted to share with us about the festival, or about upcoming works, or anything we should know about?
Well, speaking of Jason, Jason Krugman will have some of his human forms at the festival.
Awesome.
It'll be interesting. The thing about the festival is Ira Levy and Liam O'Brien have been working on this for a few years. Last year we did a fundraising event they called First Light, and this is the first year. And I'm lucky that they have decided to come to Dumbo because it's right here. But they're trying to start something that exists in a lot of different cities throughout Europe, throughout Australia, many countries. New York City, we're in New York, man. We don't have a lighting festival. So it's the first one. It's not going to be as well funded as most of these others throughout the world that are financed by the municipalities, but we're definitely we're going to represent New York and get things going.
Listen, the New York, New Jersey, the tri-state area, but the New York, New Jersey nexus. There's a huge lighting community here. It's way overdue to have a festival like this. Way too many talented artists, way too many talented production teams, and I think we're going to see it explode. I think it's going to start as something that happens in Dumbo, and little by little, I think it's going to take over more and more parts of the city. And maybe next year I'll have to throw my hat in the ring and see if they accept me to do something.
Bring it. You got it. Bring it.
Listen, I have no projection mapping skills. It'll be a much smaller thing, but I'll figure something out.
It's all about light. I mean, we're doing projection mapping. Another guy's doing a laser installation. Guys like Jason are doing lighting sculptures. It's anything to do with light.
It's awesome. Really, really awesome. Yeah. Well, John, thank you so much for coming on the show tonight. It was a pleasure. We're going to have links to the festival, to your site. If there are any social media links or anything that you want us to link up to, we'll have those in the show notes as well. We're thrilled to have you on. I have a thing that I have to say to finish this, so that's coming up now. The Lighting Guy podcast is produced in association with AV Nation. My name is James or JP Bedell. I'm the Lighting Guy. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you, John, for being part of it.
Thank you.
All right. Have a good night. Thanks so much.
See you at the festival.
All right.
The network for the AV industry.
What are you listening to?
This
is AV.
This
is AV Nation.
This is AV Nation.